So recently we ran 8 identical surveys in the UK, and then we pre-predicted the results of the study using an electric twin audience that we created off another seed data, and actually we can see the accuracy is the same as the others. Has an average accuracy of 95%. The businesses can make decisions in 10 seconds rather than having to wait 2, maybe even 8 weeks, depending on how the size of the study, to get an answer. This system works. So for instance, a customer of ours asked 100 questions inside an hour. Well, if you think about, like, let's say you put that into an omnibus, let's say maximum speed, you're doing that over the course of 2 years, and it's going to cost you, 25 grand. You would never work in that way. Put in a question, 60 seconds later you get a qualitative report, and in a survey it takes a week and it costs you tens of thousands of pounds.
How do you sort of avoid bias in the models?
To be honest with you...
Hello, and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Sumner Makin, partner at Bain & Company, leading our work on AI in London. In each episode, we speak with leaders who are transforming their industries with AI. Today, I am delighted to welcome Dr. Ben Warner, founder at Electric Twin and former chief advisor on digital and data to the Prime Minister. Now he's helping brands transform using digital twins, synthetic customers, and generative AI. Delighted to have you here, Ben.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Maybe we could start by where you got the idea behind it. You know, what was the spark? What was the exact problem that you started off to solve? But that might, of course, have changed because most businesses often do evolve.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was actually initially a research fellow at UCL doing quantum physics before I started working at Faculty, which is now one of the larger AI companies. And there I led a lot of the work on, sort of helping companies to understand their customers, understand their audiences. And I think one of the really interesting things about sort of moving from physics to social science is realizing that, sort of physics has been going on since Newton and Galileo, let's say,
Indeed.
hundreds and hundreds of years. But actually, when you go back in social sciences, depending on where you start it from, you can claim 150 years, maybe you'd say Adam Smith, but it's like, it's really young, it's science. And so, I think it's there's just this a huge weight of possibilities. I was going to say low-hanging fruits, but having mentioned Newton, it would have been a bit too much on the nose of the pun. I think that's a really exciting opportunity. So since then, I've just been exploring different ways of using data and the new tools to be able to provide better insight to human behavior. And then, with these new AI models, it just seemed like an unbelievable opportunity to actually crack those really hard problems that sit at the very heart of public policy and also every business.
I'm really curious. I saw that you were chief advisor on digital and data to the Prime Minister during COVID, where data kind of mattered, even more than usual. Did that influence your vision, or what was your experience?
100%. We tried our absolute hardest to follow the science, to really push forward how we were using data, how we were using modelling to help with decisions. And I think there are some really, really positive successes. The ONS infection study is a really good example of using top class data collection, etc., to be able to go after a really hard problem. But there are others where we did not do well. And I think understanding what was going on in the world, how people were acting, was one of them. I think that really sits at the heart of the problems with the COVID response. We didn't understand how people were behaving, and then we didn't know how to create policies that would allow us to get the behavior that we needed to try and mitigate the epidemic, but also the harms on different people. And that sort of fundamentally sits at the heart of Electric Twin. How do we help organizations be able to make those better decisions? And that's a combination of accuracy and speed. You have to be able to have these tools that actually work fast enough to be able to help that decision maker when they have to make that decision.
Absolutely. So what was it you sort of set out to change? Was it about primarily the speed element of things, that you didn't have to run some enormous expensive survey to actually get some insights that you could use straight away? Or was there more to it?
I think it's really important to think about the whole system. It's not just the data you're collecting. It's about the analysis. It's really about helping that decision maker for whatever decision they're making, whether that's a CEO trying to think about where they commit resources, an expansion into an international market or a new proposition, or if that's a more junior person thinking about what content might work best. What's the title that they should use for the blog post that they're publishing? Every business is constantly making decisions around human behavior, and actually most of them are guesswork. And tools like Electric Twin mean that you don't have to guess, you can suddenly make data-driven decisions.
And how do you build trust with your clients that they can trust this? Because as practitioners, we know that large language models are very good at adopting different personas. But for some people, that might be a leap of faith. How do you show them that actually this really is a very strong way of approaching the problem?
I mean, the main way we do it is we do a huge amount of evaluation. We really work hard to show people that it works. We do custom evaluations on every customer's data to show how accurate we are, but also we run large experiments. So recently we ran 8 identical surveys in the UK, and then we pre-predicted the results of the study using an electric twin audience that we created off a seed data, which was based on a market research study that had none of the same questions. And actually, we can see the accuracy is the same, has an average accuracy of 95%. So like this system works. That's the key thing, is that there's a lot of people saying there's an academic debate, but because of the time, effort and energy we've put into making sure our engine does work, it actually reflects what populations do. Because it's important to remember that none of our tools are perfect measurements of actually what's going on in the real world.
Really not.
And therefore, actually, all we're doing here is we're saying, rather than using sort of like the algorithms that were, used in the 1950s when we really had low compute, why don't we use the most modern algorithms and then take the benefits of that to be able to make it so the businesses can make decisions in 10 seconds rather than having to wait 2, maybe even 8 weeks, depending on how the size of the study, to get an answer.
So how do you create these sort of synthetic populations and actually get them to really mirror human behavior and the sort of answers that humans would give? Because it would be very easy to just create a big array of different alleged personas, but really they're not really doing anything very different. How do you think about these synthetic customers?
I 100% agree with you. I think that, at some point we might be able to conjure out of the sort of the ether of the LLMs really realistic audiences that really can do. But at the moment, I don't think that's true. I don't think anyone's seen that. And my worry is there's a certain circular logic. If you say create a population that cares about X, at the end, you will show that the population is about X. So what we do rather than that is actually we use seed data. Often we use market research surveys that our customers have or we use, or actually we can use other forms of data sets, people's behavior on their platform or CRM sets, to be able to create these realistic populations. And that combination of the large language models that are the part of our engine and that seed data is how we get that really accurate result. And also how we can show that's true, because what we can do is we can hold out some of that seed data and then test that synthetic population to predict the accuracy and show our clients that, yes, it does work. Yes, it is accurate.
What do you think are the biggest advantages of using synthetic data rather than actually having to run large-scale trials? What's the ones that your clients sort of really appreciate? I think we can think of a lot of things where it'd be really, really, really helpful. But what is it that your clients really specifically rate as the top versus those which you might have thought would be really important, but perhaps aren't to them?
Yeah, I think we're only at the start of this journey. I think that our clients are even using our tools in ways that surprise us. Obviously, the speed is a massive deal. 100,000 times speed up is a massive deal. But actually, I think the reason why that's such a big deal is it allows you to work in a different way. It allows you to work in an iterative process. So rather than a survey, we've all been there where we're trying to work out which is the most important question to ask, or anyone who's put a survey in the field knows exactly what question they should have asked. Actually, here you can ask a question, then ask another question, and then think, okay, why could that be true? And then you can ask a follow-up question. So, for instance, a customer of ours asked 100 questions inside an hour. Well, if you think about, let's say you put that into an omnibus at, let's say maximum speed, you're doing that over the course of 2 years, and it's going to cost you 25 grand. You would never work in that way. So that's speed of iteration. The other thing is you can talk to the audience you actually want to talk to rather than the audience that you have access to. So often in a survey, it's often nationally represented because that's all we can really represent. And actually here you can then say, okay, of the people who answered, very positively to my brand, okay, how can I follow up? Would you be interested in this proposition? Would you be interested in this? How much might you pay for this? And so that's the other thing. You can start moving from having to ask a general audience, because that's all you can, to talking to the specific audience you want. And that combination of being able to deep dive and get that deep understanding and then being able to generate and test ideas at speed, I think is the massive advantage of the tools as they are currently.
That's amazing, because I think that idea of asking a follow-up question, you could just never do that in a survey because it's gone. The chance of you ever finding that individual again is nil.
100%.
How do you use it to sort of explore those motivations and attitudes, not just here's a multiple choice question, but really get into the motivations, why they're doing things?
There's no reason that you can't ask. We have qualitative answers in our platform as well. We can actually run debates between different agents. That's part of our tool. So you can just put in a question, 60 seconds later, you get a qualitative report as you would if you ran a focus group, except it takes, 30 seconds, not a week, and it costs you basically zero rather than tens of thousands of pounds. So you can do all that sort of stuff. The key part, though, I think for us is actually why humans make decisions is not a well-known factor. We have theories, but are they true? So actually, you can ask these questions. And so I think there's a really interesting thing of well, actually, how accurate are our current tools? And therefore, should we be looking to replicate our current tools, or actually can we go further than that? And I think we can. And the reason I think we can do that is that we can base the synthetic personas on other data sets, not just our conventional what people say they will do. And I think those sort of behavioral data sets might allow us to predict behavior in a way that is more accurate than traditional methods.
Because with conventional surveys, people do have a tendency to lie. I mean, if offer a price, they never want more. Maybe lies are too strong.
I think we too often think of it as lying. Actually, it's just, I don't care. Like, the classic NPS rating. How many times would you recommend us to the friends? Actually, the answer to everyone we know, because you barely recommend anything to your friends. So it's always based on a sort of proxy measurement that it's what we can do rather than what we should do. And I think these tools actually start moving us towards what we should be doing rather than what we can do.
Absolutely. One of the things you mentioned is sort of compare that to traditional surveys. People might have some questions about sort of the ethics side of things, but I think you also brought out some positives, particularly there, that with privacy, but I'd love to hear your thoughts from the ethical perspective.
Ethics it's really important. I think that AI is a wonderful opportunity, but we have to make sure we're always doing it right. Electric Twin, we have an ethics board. We established that very early on because we think it's important. But fundamentally, I think sometimes it's because we're sort of imagining a sort of a magic world of AI rather than actually what we're doing. What we're actually using is we're using data and models to make predictions. We've been using data and models to make predictions for a number of years. And I would make the argument that all we're doing now is we're using better models to make better predictions. And I think that's better for everyone. If you better understand people's lived experience, if we could have better understood people's lived experience in COVID, we'd have built better policies. So I do think there's a really important thing of ethics, but I think it's really important that we actually concentrate on how do we give better outcomes for everyone rather than focusing on how things might go wrong, and especially things that might go wrong, which we have no evidence for right now.
Absolutely, and you actually need that evidence. As the technology evolves and people start using synthetic customers and digital twins at scale, how do you think that'll actually change markets? For me, particularly retail is of interest, but if there are other areas, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's going to change. Obviously, it's going to change how we think about insight, how we think about market research. I think it's going to be a bonus, if we're honest, because I think actually suddenly, if you're a company and you're going to do a 1,000-person survey and you can only ask 30 questions, well, actually going for the cheaper option is probably, better. It's hard to make an argument ROI to go to a higher quality. But if you can then use that data across your whole organization to make every decision better in the organization, suddenly it's worth paying a bit more to get a higher quality sample. That means we can pay people who are taking surveys or we're collecting data off more. And I think that's better for everyone. Then I think it fundamentally changes how we think about analytics and insights. We've gone through the era of sort of democratization of data, building business insight tools to allow everyone to be making decisions based on data. And I think this is one of the tools that I think is starting to think about the democratization of insight. So no longer is it sort of like, only some people within an organization are sort of can use, market research. They're the only people who can say, okay, this is important enough for us to do a study. Actually, like I said, everyone in the organization can have that sort of customer centric view. So I think it starts changing how we think about different roles in an organization, how we make decisions in an organization, and how we give access to people so everyone can be focused on the customer problems and solving the customer's needs.
So it's bringing that much closer to the people who are making the decisions rather than being just done by a primary researcher in a corner somewhere. Not that they would be in a corner, but
then sometimes that information doesn't get to the person in the insight function and the person who the growth marketeer, especially in their secondary market or something. They might not communicate. And therefore, that data, that insight actually has a little impact on the actual decisions. Whereas this allows you to actually make sure everyone has access to those decisions. Everyone's trying to do their best to make the most informed decision that they can. And then also the other thing that I think is really valuable is that by removing the human from the loop, you're building software. And as soon as you're building software, you can build analytics into the software. So you can just build much more advanced analytics on top of it to make it easier for everyone to understand what's going on, to be able to do, sort of custom bespoke segmentations. Some of the projects that, maybe 5 years ago would have been high-end data science projects, you can now do an electric twin in 30 seconds because we have control of that, the data generation loop all the way through to the outcome. And I think that's really powerful. And I think that's an area which will have massive benefits for the businesses as well.
Having talked about synthetic data a lot, are there sort of use cases beyond sort of synthetic customers? How else might people be using your technology?
I think synthetic populations is a better term for this type of thing because, as I said, it's sort of like data populations inference. And because actually, when you start thinking about it just like that, it's a synthetic population you can interact with. The number of opportunities just is like, well, everything, right? I think it's really interesting to say, for instance, we can think about, okay, what are the main problems that companies often have? Well, how can they have better interaction with employees? How do you help CEOs of large multinational companies understand their different audiences, both their employees? So you can think about a huge range of products and tools where actually it's all around behavioral prediction. And actually, and then when you think about big problems that government has or things that they're trying to help, obesity, mental health, net zero. These are all actually about behavior change. So you can think about how these tools might allow us to make better policy decisions. And so help that, say, for instance, net zero, help that transition in a fair way where we in the sort of lowest cost way possible as well.
So does that change the way we think about customer insight? And not just consumers, but people in general, as you mentioned on the COVID example, to move from something the sort of traditional, very static demographic buckets to something that's just a little bit more interesting.
Yes, I think synthetic audiences allow you to do that, but I also think just data science has started that trend.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, demographics was the best way to do it a long time ago, but now actually often the reason we still have to stick to that is just by being able to communicate that to people. You can build a really complex data science model that allows to make very accurate predictions. But then if you hand that over to a marketeer who has to write it down on an A4 piece of paper, it doesn't really matter. They're just going to have to write down like your classic demographics. Whereas with this, actually, because, you can just give the tool to that marketeer and then they can just ask it, who's likely to buy our product? You can think of it as transmitting that high bandwidth of information and therefore allowing you to just move on from sort of unpredictive things or things that are generally predictive, but for other reasons. Actually, when we think about traditional segments, actually, say, for instance, in Electric Twin, we have a large number of people of different ages, and actually all of them are sort of commonly working in a startup. So for some companies, we all look the same. But actually, as soon as we walk out that door, we all are very different. Some people are parents, some people are young in partnerships, some people are single. And then actually how businesses want to talk to them and who they're trying to promote, some care about health. And so actually, I think it's about, we can start thinking about what does somebody actually represent at different points of their day-to-day life, not just as an overall sort of static picture.
That's so intriguing. One of the things you talked about earlier was about testing what synthetic personas said versus what the survey had said, and treating it like a model. How good is it at predicting the data that you held out? How do you sort of avoid bias in the models? Because we learned very early on when LLMs started appearing that they can be biased just because of the way that they use temperature to come up with the answer. How do you think about that? I mean, without revealing any sort of super secret sources.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one, right? Because bias has two main using. One is the statistical bias, and one is, the prejudice that people have against groups of people, whether they're
indeed.
And actually, in Electric Twin, unfortunately, the prejudice of somebody, whether in the positive aspect, a parent towards their children, these sort of things we actually want to build into our models. And then on the statistical side, it's just about doing good maths, doing good science. Actually, we have a science advisor, Michael Murakrishna, who's a professor at LSE. He's one of the most thoughtful behavioral scientists around how different cultures have different belief systems, value systems, etc. So right from the start, we've always had that in mind. But fundamentally, it's just about testing it, checking it works against the real world, and doing your best to try and be as accurate as possible.
No, totally. And then thinking more about that sort of human aspect of things. If a client is using your platform, how do they should they think about, yes, the data says something, but to also use their own judgments to make good decisions based on that data? How can they not just trust what the model says, although this is clearly a very good model? Yeah, how do you think about that combination of sort of strategic thinking and...
I think it's really important. I think that this is an interesting almost debate when you think about sort of how do you build these sort of expert co-pilots? So, for instance, let's say even autopilots in aeroplanes, if they only switch on in an emergency situation, you panic the pilot, is he in the best place to make a decision? You build guardrails that help a human think about it, what the information is represented. And, in some ways, this is, when people sort of talk about, you can use statistics to prove any point. This is really what they're talking about, right? Is a sort of like a scientificism, sort of like, oh, it's numbers show it, therefore, it's in an Excel spreadsheet, therefore it is something meaningful. So when we are working with clients, we work really closely with our clients, and it's really about us helping them to sort of have this trust in the system, but also trust in themselves. And the system is designed to help that decision maker make the right decision. And the advantage here is that if they're unsure, they can just ask another question. Whereas on a survey, you've got the questions, and then from there, it's somebody, sort of like, well, it's just down to your intuition and your gut feel. Whereas at least here, you can actually ask further questions. You can test. You can really check. Okay, if somebody was thinking this for this reason, they would probably believe this. Okay, I can just test that. And so it's about helping people to realize that they can use it to create a test of what their idea is, and then they can check it within the system. And because that check only takes 20 to 30 seconds, it's people will actually do it. So that's why I think it helps you to get better decisions.
Definitely. It's not taking the human out of the loop. It's helping with better decisions.
Exactly. I mean, I think the interesting thing about human behavior, sometimes we sort of talk about it as though it's like weather forecasting. But with weather forecasting, if you want to check what the weather's like right now, you can just stick your head out the window. Oh, it's sunny, it's hot, it's raining. With human beliefs and human populations, you can't say that. Like what people's attitudes in Britain today is on large issues, we don't know. Even when we devote huge amounts of resources to it, and say, for instance, forecasting elections, we're often wrong, right? In the recent election, we were pretty off on the Labour vote share. Right?
Yeah, hugely.
Actually, I think that what we need is better tools, and actually anything that allows people to have a better idea of what's going on in the world and how might people react will help them make better decisions.
Where does this work really well, and where is it sort of, well, it works okay, but actually we want to work on that more and see if we can develop it? So areas where people listening to the podcast say, oh, well, we should totally be using it, and which areas are under development still?
To be honest with you, our recent experiments showed that we are as accurate as sort of traditional methodologies. This is why we're starting to explore other data sources. Because what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to see how accurate can we be towards surveys. Actually, we're trying to say how accurate are we in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually,
real world matters.
There is the current sort of yardsticks aren't very good. And so where does it not work? Well, where do surveys not work? Well, we know they don't work in general elections, and that's the only place we test them. So it's a really difficult test. Actually, we've got a lot of work on the way. A lot of our R&D efforts at the moment is not devoted to how can we make our engine better? It's where does it not work? And actually, that's a difficult challenge right now, because what we see is it's as predictive as we expect in lots of areas. The only thing I will say is when you go very far away from the seed data, we expect it to drop off, but we can't predict that drop off right now, which is an interesting, and that's one of the things we're trying to build right now.
Just looking further ahead. Where's the business going? What excites you?
I mean, it's just really exciting seeing it being used in the real world for companies making decisions. We're lucky enough to have some really good clients in media, telecoms, strategic communications, using it in real life to make decisions and to help their businesses. That's the most exciting thing, when you see it in the real world. And then the other nice thing is because we've talked about the evaluation that we do internally in Electric Twin. But obviously every one of our clients has access to our predictions, and they're testing it every day. And some of them are then actually saying, okay, we're pretty convinced by this, let's go out and test it. And so every time we get an email from a customer saying, we did this real world test, somebody didn't believe it, so we did the focus groups, and actually they said exactly what your engine said. That's the really exciting. I think that's the science. But when that sort of thing happens, and it feels sometimes like the tool we've built are like magic. They really feel like for these companies that they just give them such a competitive advantage now. It's unbelievable. I mean, if I said to you, I can give you 100,000 times speed up, you don't often hear about sort of processes like that. That's sort of
really
that
not.
Almost beats I don't know what the speed up was from mass production on the Henry Ford's lines, but it's not far off that. It's incredible.
Remember Demis Habbis' quote about it, the Industrial Revolution, but 10 times bigger and probably 10 times as fast. It does feel very much like that.
So except the fact it's not 10 times faster, it's 100,000 times faster in this case.
Yes, yes. And that's not even, that's crazy.
Yeah.
As the models get even better, what do you expect? Where do you expect things to go from there? Because if it's working really well at the moment.
Well, I think it's really interesting because our system has really improved over time, but that's not directly correlated with the improvements in the models. And so I think that, as these models improve, I think they will help with human behavior and they will make them more powerful. But actually what I think we'll see is more and more companies like ourselves that are using these models in different ways, and how that develops is really interesting. The way I think about it is like back in the days they invented the steam engine that sat outside mines, and at the moment we're building bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger steam engines. And what we've done is taken one of those steam engines and put it on wheels and discovered it's really powerful and it's really fun and you can go really fast.
Really fast.
And so I think in some ways, and then if you said, okay, well, how does bigger, better steam engines help you? Obviously there's learnings, but it's not a direct comparison. And that's how I feel. And I think there'll be lots of other people, creating the equivalent in lots of different areas.
That's awesome. And then thinking more generally, you're clearly excited about AI, as am I. What sort of most excites you about the future in general? I'm thinking, how much has the world changed since I was in a new baby 40 odd years ago? What is it that really makes you smile and think, wow, that's awesome?
Well, basically, the thing that makes me most excited is exactly what you've just described. Like when you think about the things that have come through since, I was a child, the internet, the access to books, Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is of science fiction. The running joke of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy actually exists. And I think that just like that opportunity, like mobile phones, all these wonderful technologies have come. Nobody would have necessarily predicted them. So I think it's just that. And I think AI will just be a revolution on a similar scale. And I'm just really excited to be part of it.
That's amazing. And is there anything I should have asked you that I maybe have missed?
No, I think the interesting part of this is really this idea of coming at like a really basic scientific problem. How do we understand humans just with these new tools? And I think, we've already seen how the impact of AI around sort of biology, Demis winning the Nobel Prize being an example of that.
Yeah.
Well, fundamentally, remember, a lot of the internet and big data comes from the pursuit of particle physics. The social science revolution is underestimated. And I think, especially in the UK, where we're a 70% services economy, actually a lot of the stuff that people are doing is essentially social science. If you think about the work that you do every day, it's essentially social science, but at the coalface trying to understand and influence people. So the fact there's new tools coming through and these new tools are being developed in the UK, but also in other countries, I think it's exciting for the UK about how we do that. But I also think we have to make sure that we're really sort of pushing to develop these tools and building these tools. Otherwise, I think we will be left behind. On the optimistic side of AI, I think it's going to create great change. But I think on the other side, if we're not at the forefront of building these tools, we will be left behind. We're lucky enough, the UK is probably the third best AI cluster in the world right now. And I think we have to work really hard to make sure.
DeepMind being here, there are no excuses, but I get the sense of urgency really is required.
And I think there are, the government, I think we should be positive about the efforts that the government is doing. The
absolutely.
Securities Plan, the AI Security Centre, these are great things to build off. But we need to make sure that they are starting points, they are seeds rather than the final structures. And I think that's just a really important factor of, how do we make sure that, the next £1 billion companies coming out of the UK can grow to the size of, Meta and Google, etc. And I think we can. I think that, those companies already exist in the UK today, except if we accidentally kill them or sort of put into constraints that mean they move to the USA.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We need to really make stuff happen. Thank you very much. Seeing so optimistic about the future as well, which I'm equally optimistic. Really appreciate it. It's very kind of you to talk to us.
Well, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.